Every morning at 6:15, I'd pass the corner of Main Street and Oak Avenue, and every morning, there he was, Robert, a man in his early 60s, with graying, disheveled hair, but always with a genuine smile on his face. He sold homemade coffee from an old thermos, along with some cookies he baked himself. Most people walked right past him without a glance, hurried, trapped in their own worlds, glued to their phones, deaf to anything beyond their own urgencies. But I always stopped. Not out of pity. It was never out of pity. It was because his coffee was honestly good, and because Robert had something most people had lost: authentic conversation. "Morning, Daniel," he'd say, already pouring my usual. Black coffee, no sugar. "You look tired today. Rough night?" "Client presentation," I'd reply, handing him $5 for a coffee that he charged $2 for. "Stayed up until 3 preparing slides." "Ah, the corporate grind," he'd chuckle, never commenting on the extra money. He'd just nod, slip it into his worn canvas bag, and hand me a cookie. "On the house. You'll need the energy." That was our routine, 5 days a week for 8 months. I learned that Robert had been a high school English teacher before life took an unexpected turn. Divorce, medical bills, a series of unfortunate events that spiraled into homelessness. He never complained, never asked for more than a fair price for his coffee. He talked about books, about the changing seasons, about the small miracles he noticed that everyone else missed. "See that bird?" He'd point to a sparrow on the traffic light. "Same one comes every morning. I call her Margaret. She's got a nest somewhere in that building. 3 babies this spring." I'd smile, sip my coffee, and for those 5 minutes, the pressure of my job at Morrison & Associates would fade. Robert's Corner became my daily meditation, a reminder that life existed beyond spreadsheets and quarterly reports. My colleagues thought I was crazy. "You buy coffee from a homeless guy?" Marcus from accounting had said, his nose wrinkled in disgust. "Dude, there's a Starbucks literally 1 block away." "His coffee's better," I'd replied simply. And it was true. But it was more than that. Robert treated his small business with dignity. He was clean, his thermos was spotless, and he took pride in what he offered. He wasn't begging. He was working. On Fridays, I'd bring him a breakfast sandwich from the deli. He'd protest at first, but eventually accepted it as part of our friendship, because that's what it had become. Not a transaction between a housed person and a homeless person, but a genuine friendship between 2 human beings. "You know, Daniel," Robert said one Friday in late October, the autumn winds scattering leaves around his corner, "you're one of the few people who still sees me. Most folks, they look right through me, like I'm invisible. But you see me." "You're hard to miss, Robert," I joked. "That coffee aroma's pretty distinctive." But he shook his head, serious for once. "No, I mean really see me. See the person, not just the circumstances." He paused, pouring my coffee with care. "That means more than you know." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. We stood there for a moment, 2 men on a street corner, connected by something simple and profound: mutual respect. That was on a Friday, the last Friday of October. Halloween was coming, and Robert had joked about dressing up as a businessman ghost to scare the commuters. I'd laughed, promised to bring him some candy the next week, and headed to my office. The weekend passed in its usual blur: college football, laundry, a date that went nowhere, and the creeping dread of Monday morning. When Monday came, I dragged myself out of bed, showered, dressed in my standard suit and tie, and headed out into the crisp November morning. 6:15, the corner of Main and Oak. But Robert wasn't there. I stood there, confused. In 8 months, he'd never missed a day, not once. Rain, shine, summer heat, or autumn chill, Robert was always there. His absence felt wrong, like a note missing from a familiar song. Maybe he's just running late, I thought. So I waited. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. By 6:30, I had to leave or risk being late to my own morning meeting. I walked to the office with a strange knot in my stomach, my hand wrapped around a coffee from Starbucks that tasted like cardboard compared to Robert's brew. Maybe tomorrow, I told myself. But Tuesday came, and Robert wasn't there. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. A whole week passed, and the corner remained empty. No thermos, no cookies, no Robert. I started asking around. The newspaper vendor 2 blocks down, the guy who ran the hot dog cart on 5th Street, even the security guard at the bank on the corner. Nobody had seen him. The homeless guy with the coffee? The security guard, Tom, scratched his head. Yeah, I know who you mean. Nice guy. Haven't seen him in over a week, though. They come and go, you know? But Robert wasn't like that. He had his spot, his routine, his customers. A small handful of us who actually stopped, who actually bought his coffee. He wouldn't just disappear without a word. By the second week, I was genuinely worried. I found myself walking different routes, checking nearby streets, looking for that familiar face. Nothing. It was like Robert had simply vanished into thin air. You're obsessing, my girlfriend Sarah said over dinner one night. We were at some trendy Italian place downtown, the kind with tiny portions and huge prices. He probably just moved to a different corner, or maybe he got into a shelter program. He would have told me, I insisted, pushing my overpriced pasta around the plate. Daniel, you barely knew him. He was just what? Just a homeless guy selling coffee? I could hear the edge in my voice. He was my friend, Sarah. She set down her fork, her expression a mixture of pity and frustration. He wasn't your friend. He was someone you gave money to. There's a difference. That night was the beginning of the end for us, though we'd limp along for another month before officially calling it quits. But in that moment, I realized something. Sarah and I lived in completely different worlds, even though we occupied the same city. The third week without Robert, I did something I'd never done before. I went to the public library and asked about resources for finding missing homeless individuals. The librarian, an older woman named Patricia with kind eyes, directed me to a social worker who worked with the homeless population. His name was Marcus Webb, and his office was in a cramped nonprofit building near the old industrial district. The walls were covered with flyers about housing assistance, mental health services, and job training programs. Robert Thompson, Marcus repeated, typing into his ancient computer. Gray hair, early 60s, usually hangs around Main and Oak. Yes, you know him? Marcus nodded slowly. I know of him. Good guy. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's never been any trouble. He frowned at his screen. According to our records, he checked into Metro General Hospital about 2 weeks ago. My heart dropped. Is he okay? What happened? I can't give you specific medical information, Marcus said carefully. Privacy laws. But he hesitated, seeming to weigh something. Look, Robert doesn't have any listed emergency contacts. No family that we know of. If you're genuinely concerned, maybe you could visit. Sometimes just having someone show up means everything. He wrote down the hospital name and room number on a sticky note and slid it across the desk. Visiting hours are until 8 p.m. I left work early that day, something I never did. Morrison and Associates frowned upon anything that suggested you had a life outside the office. But I didn't care. I drove across town to Metro General, a massive complex that smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Room 447. I knocked softly before pushing open the door. Robert lay in the hospital bed, looking smaller than I remembered, thinner. The gray in his hair seemed to have spread, and there were dark circles under his eyes. But when he saw me, his face lit up with that familiar smile. Daniel, His voice was raspy, weak. "You found me." "Of course I found you." I pulled a chair close to his bed. "You didn't show up for coffee. I was worried." He laughed, which turned into a cough. A nurse appeared, checked his vitals, adjusted something on his IV, and disappeared again with professional efficiency. "Pneumonia," Robert explained once he caught his breath. "Spent one too many cold nights outside, I guess. It hit me fast. One day I was fine. The next I was here." "How long have you been here?" 16 days. They wanted to discharge me after a week, but he gestured vaguely at the room. Nowhere to discharge me to. Can't exactly recover from pneumonia on a street corner. So they're keeping me until they can find placement in a care facility. A care facility? Shelter with medical support. Not ideal, but better than nothing. He looked at me with those sharp, intelligent eyes. "How'd you find me?" I told him about my search, about Marcus Webb, about how the corner didn't feel right without him there. "You really came looking for me," Robert said softly. "You know, Daniel, I've been invisible for so long. Even when people see me, they don't really see me. They see a homeless guy, a problem, an inconvenience to step around." He reached for a cup of water, his hand trembling slightly. "But you see me. You always have. I miss our morning talks, and honestly, Starbucks coffee is terrible." He laughed again, stronger this time. "Now that's the truth." We talked for an hour. He told me about the hospital, about the parade of social workers and case managers trying to figure out what to do with him, about the other patients, the nurses he'd befriended, the terrible hospital food that somehow still beat eating out of trash cans. "They're trying to get me into a program, transitional housing, job training, even though I'm probably too old for most places to hire. But it's a chance. Maybe my first real chance in years." "That's great, Robert. Really great." "Yeah, but he didn't sound entirely convinced. It's in Riverside, though. Other side of the city. I'd have to leave my corner." "Your corner will still be there, but this is about your health, your future." He nodded, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. That corner wasn't just a location. It was his business, his identity, his last thread of dignity in a world that had stripped away almost everything else. I visited Robert 3 more times that week. Each time he looked a little stronger, a little more like himself. On my 4th visit, I brought something with me. A folder full of papers. "What's this?" Robert asked, curious. I did some research. Opened the folder. There are programs, real programs, not just shelters, but actual pathways back. Housing first initiatives, job placement for older workers, even small business grants for people trying to restart their lives. Robert looked through the papers, his expression unreadable. "Daniel, I appreciate this, but just hear me out," I interrupted. "You're not just some guy who fell on hard times. You're an English teacher. You ran your own small business for 8 months with nothing but a thermos and determination. You have skills, experience. You just need a chance." "I'm 62 years old," he said quietly. "I've been on the streets for 4 years. I have no address, no references, no recent work history. On paper, I'm unemployable." "Then we change the paper," I said firmly. "I'll be your reference. My firm does pro bono work. I can connect you with employment lawyers who specialize in helping people with gaps in their work history. And the transitional housing program? That's your address. That's your fresh start." Robert was quiet for a long moment, staring at the papers in his lap. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you're my friend," I said simply, "and because everyone deserves a second chance. You taught me to see people, Robert, really see them. Now let me help you be seen by the people who can actually make a difference." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay, let's try." The next 3 months were a whirlwind.
Robert was discharged to the transitional housing facility in Riverside, a clean, safe place with case managers and support services. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm, and it was his. I visited every weekend. We worked on his resume together, framing his street vending as independent small business ownership and his years of teaching as extensive experience in education and mentorship. I connected him with a job counselor at a nonprofit I'd found and helped him practice interview skills. "Tell me about a time you overcame adversity," I'd ask, playing the interviewer. Robert would laugh. "How much time do you have?" But he got good at telling his story not as a tragedy, but as a testament to resilience, at showing potential employers not where he'd been, but where he was capable of going. The rejections came first, dozens of them. Too old, too much gap in employment, overqualified for entry-level positions, underqualified for anything else. Each one hit hard, and I could see Robert's hope dimming with every "we regret to inform you" letter. "Maybe this was a mistake," he said one Saturday in February. We were sitting in the common area of his facility, playing chess on a worn board. "Maybe I should just accept that this is as good as it gets. I have a roof over my head, 3 meals a day. That's more than I had a year ago." "It's not enough," I moved my knight. "You deserve more than just survival, Robert. You deserve to live." He captured my knight with his bishop. "Checkmate in 4 moves," he said absently. Then he looked at me. "You really believe that?" "I know it." 2 weeks later, he got the call. The Riverside Public Library was looking for someone to run their literacy program, teaching adults to read, helping with GED preparation, mentoring at-risk youth. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, and it was exactly what Robert had been born to do. "They want to interview me," he told me over the phone, his voice shaking with excitement and terror. "Daniel, I don't have interview clothes. "I'm on my way," I said, already grabbing my car keys. We went shopping that weekend. A good suit from a discount store, dress shoes, a tie. Robert looked at himself in the dressing room mirror like he was seeing a stranger. "I look like a teacher again," he whispered. "You are a teacher," I corrected. "You never stopped being one." The interview was on Tuesday at 10 a.m. I took the morning off work, much to my boss's annoyance, and drove Robert to the library. He was nervous, fidgeting with his tie, running through potential questions in his head. "You've got this," I told him as we pulled into the parking lot. "Just be yourself. Tell them your story. Show them what I already know, that you're the best person for this job." He took a deep breath, nodded, and got out of the car. I waited in a coffee shop across the street, unable to focus on anything. I checked my phone every 30 seconds, bought 3 coffees I didn't drink, and nearly wore a path in the floor from pacing. After 90 minutes, my phone rang. "I got it!" Robert's voice came through, thick with emotion. "Daniel, I got the job! I start next month!" I may have shouted in that coffee shop. The barista definitely looked at me like I was crazy, but I didn't care. Robert started at the Riverside Public Library on March 15th. I drove him to his first day, both of us quiet with the weight of the moment. He wore his interview suit, now pressed and perfect, and carried a leather messenger bag I'd given him as a congratulations gift. "Nervous?" I asked as we pulled up. "Terrified," he admitted. "It's been so long since I've been normal. Since I had somewhere to be in the morning that wasn't a street corner."
You were always normal, Robert. The circumstances were abnormal. You never were. He smiled at that, gripped his bag, and walked toward the library entrance. At the door, he turned back and waved. I waved back, feeling an unexpected lump in my throat. That evening, he called me. "Daniel, it was amazing. I met my students. Adults who never learned to read properly, immigrants working on their English, teenagers who dropped out and were trying for their GED. And I helped them. I actually helped them." His voice was alive with purpose.
This is what I was meant to do. I'd forgotten, but this is who I am. Over the next few months, Robert thrived. He moved from the transitional housing into a small studio apartment. Nothing fancy, an efficiency in an older building, but it was his. He furnished it slowly, piece by piece, from thrift stores and yard sales. A bookshelf, a decent bed, a small table where he could grade papers and prepare lessons. I helped him move in, carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs. As we assembled a second-hand desk, Robert paused. You know what's strange? A year ago, I was sleeping under a bridge in December. 6 months ago, I was in a hospital bed with pneumonia, convinced I'd die on the streets. And now, he looked around his small apartment. Now I'm home. You earned this, I said, every bit of it. We earned this, he corrected. Daniel, if you hadn't stopped for coffee that first morning, if you hadn't treated me like a person instead of a problem, if you hadn't come looking for me when I disappeared, he shook his head. I'd probably be dead, or still out there, getting weaker every winter, waiting for the cold to finally win. You would have found a way, I said. But we both knew it wasn't necessarily true. How many people fell through the cracks because no one noticed they were gone? On a Saturday in June, Robert invited me to the library. Special event, he'd said mysteriously. You should see this. I arrived to find the community room packed with people. Robert's students, their families, library staff, and local community members. At the front of the room was a small stage with a podium. What's all this? I asked. GED graduation, Robert beamed. 12 of my students passed their exams. We're celebrating. I watched as Robert called each student to the stage, handing them their certificates, shaking their hands, often hugging them as they cried with joy and relief. A single mother of 3 who could now apply for better jobs, a 65-year-old man who'd hidden his illiteracy for decades, a teenager who'd been written off by the school system but refused to give up on herself. Robert gave a short speech. Education, he said, is the bridge between where you are and where you deserve to be. Each of you crossed that bridge through your own effort, your own determination. I just held the flashlight so you could see the way. After the ceremony, one of his students approached me. You're Daniel, right? Robert talks about you all the time. Does he? Oh yeah. Says you saved his life. I just bought coffee from him, I said, uncomfortable with the characterization. No, she shook her head. He says you saw him when he was invisible, that you treated him with dignity when the world had decided he didn't deserve any. That's not just buying coffee. That's choosing to be human. Her words stayed with me as I drove home that night. I hadn't done anything extraordinary. I'd just stopped, paid attention, treated another person with basic respect. The fact that it felt remarkable was a damning commentary on how we'd all learned to ignore suffering, to step over people, to classify human beings as problems to avoid. On a Friday in June, Robert invited me to the library.
This is where it all changed, Robert said, standing on that familiar corner of Main and Oak. The morning rush hour flowed around us, people buried in their phones, rushing to wherever they needed to be. This is where I had my business, my dignity, and where you reminded me that I was still a person worth knowing. You want to know something? I asked. That corner changed my life too. Before I met you, I was just going through the motions. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. I wasn't really living. I wasn't really seeing anything. You taught me to pay attention, to see the person, not the circumstances, to understand that everyone has a story and everyone deserves to have that story heard. Robert pulled out a thermos from his bag. I brought coffee. He grinned. Made it myself, just like old times, and I perfected the cookie recipe. We stood there, 2 friends sharing coffee on a street corner while the city rushed by.
Some people glanced at us curiously. Why were two well-dressed men just standing there? But most didn't notice us at all. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Robert said, sipping his coffee. "How many others are out there? People like I was. Invisible. One bad break away from catastrophe, or already there, wondering if anyone would notice if they disappeared." "A lot," I admitted. "Too many. So, what do we do about it?" That question led to what came next. Robert and I started a nonprofit. Second Corner, we called it. The mission was simple: provide pathways back for homeless individuals who wanted to work, who needed just a chance, a connection, someone to see them. We started small, helping a few people at a time, connecting them with resources, being their advocates and references, showing up when they needed someone to show up. Robert ran the mentorship program, using his own story to inspire others. I handled the business side, fundraising, partnerships with local companies willing to hire people with unconventional backgrounds. It wasn't easy. There were failures, people who weren't ready, who fell back into old patterns, who we couldn't reach no matter how hard we tried. Each one hurt. But there were successes too. A former veteran who became a security supervisor, a woman who'd lost everything to medical debt and was now a certified nursing assistant, a man who'd been on the streets for a decade and now ran his own small landscaping business. Each success was a reminder that people aren't defined by their worst moments or their hardest circumstances. They're defined by what they do when given a genuine chance. 3 years after that first morning, when Robert didn't show up, we held our annual fundraiser. The keynote speaker was Robert, telling his story to a room full of donors, volunteers, and community partners. He said from the podium, "I was invisible, not because I chose to be, but because that's what happens when society decides you don't matter anymore. And I might have stayed invisible, might have become another statistic, another nameless person who died on the streets, forgotten and alone. But one person stopped. One person bought my coffee and saw me as a human being. And that changed everything." He paused, finding me in the crowd. "Daniel didn't save my life with some grand gesture. He saved it with small, consistent acts of dignity. By showing up, by giving a damn, by refusing to accept that my circumstances defined my worth. And now, together, we're trying to do that for others. Because everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves a second corner." The room erupted in applause. I felt my eyes sting with tears. After the event, as we were packing up, Robert handed me something. A small package, wrapped simply. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a thermos. The thermos. His original one from the corner, dented and worn, but polished clean. "I want you to have it." I turned the thermos over in my hands, feeling the weight of it, the history. "Thank you," I managed to say. "No." Robert put his hand on my shoulder. "Thank you for that first cup of coffee, for the $5 bills that kept my business alive, for coming to find me when I disappeared, for believing in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. Thank you for seeing me, Daniel, for really seeing me." We stood there, two men who'd started as customer and vendor on a street corner, and had become something much more profound, proof that human connection matters, that small acts of kindness ripple outward in ways we can never fully predict, and that no one is ever truly invisible unless we choose not to see them. Every morning now, I still stop at that corner. Not for coffee, though I do drink from Robert's old thermos, filled with my own brew. I stop to remember, to see the people around me,
to notice who's there and who's missing, to understand that behind every face on every corner is a complete human being with a story, with dignity, with the potential for change if someone just takes the time to see them. Robert was right. We all deserve a second corner, a second chance, a moment when someone stops, really looks at us, and decides that we matter. All it takes is one person willing to stop, to see, to care. Sometimes that makes all the difference.